the gallows? Sure.
Was Davis afraid of the gallows after the war?
No. I will say the 2 years in Fort Monroe, what I wanted more than anything, and the leaders of the Confederacy, is to have a trial. The trial never came because the Chief Justice Salmon Chase said, we can't try these men, they might win. We would have won our case, because the argument was really secession. We would have won our case, then the war would have been fought for what? Nothing.
You got a question?
What were your families like?
What were our families like? For mine, I had 4 children and a wife. That was the center of my life, my family. And oftentimes during the war, I was able to bring my wife and some of my children along with me, which is one of the perks of being a general officer.
Well, the Lincoln family, there were 4 children born to the Lincolns. By the time they arrived in Washington, one of them had passed away already. He would have been 14 by this point. They brought 3 children with them, and one of them died while they lived in the White House in February '62. So when Lincoln was assassinated, only 2 of the children were yet living, and then Tad, the younger of those 2, died 4 years later, at the age of 19. And then Robert was the only one who lived to adulthood, and he was the firstborn, and passed away in 1946.
I had 7 children. My oldest son, George Washington Custis Lee, was an adjutant to the president. My second son, Fitzhugh Rooney Lee, was a cavalry commander, major general, and Custis was also a major general. And my youngest son, Rob Jr., was a captain and an adjutant to his brother, Rudy. I had 4 daughters, one of which, Annie, died in North Carolina due to a fever during the war. I was in the field and I could not attend her funeral. And the thoughts of never seeing her face and hearing her voice was almost more than I could bear. And then I had 3 other daughters that stayed with my wife in Richmond to the end of the war.
The reason I keep moving down is because there's only so much cord, and I don't want to hang myself. We had 6 children between the years 52 and 64. Samuel was born in 52, died in 54 of a fever. Margaret was 55 by the time I escaped. Of course, she was 10 years old in April of 65. Then we had Jefferson Jr., born 57. He will die as a 21-year-old in Memphis, Tennessee, followed by Joseph, born in 59, who would die as a 5-year-old in April of 1864, falling off the veranda. Then we had William, who was born in December 6th of 1861, and he will die as an 11-year-old of a fever. Then we have Marina Ann, who will die, or be born in June of 64, June 27th, and die in 1896, 7 years after I passed. Margaret is the only one that got married to a guy named Addison Hayes, related to a man, you might have heard of him, Rutherford B. Hayes. And only the descendants from Margaret are still alive. In fact, there's one guy named, which I've met several times, his name's Bertram Hayes / Davis. So you have to have a / Davis to become a descendant of me. And there are people all the time come up and say, oh, I'm a descendant. I says, your last name Hayes? Well, no, it's Davis. Then you're not a descendant. This is that the Union, the northern states, really used the telegraph for their benefit in communication better than the southern troops. You want to make any comment on that, either one of you?
You're right.
The first officer to ride up in a balloon and report what's happening on the ground was Lieutenant George Armstrong Custer.
I should tell you a little story. In New York State, they had a replica of one of those balloons, which is no longer. It was named the Intrepid, and I got to go up in it. They were tethered as they were in the Civil War. In the Civil War, they tethered them to boats and so on and took them out. One of the first ones was Professor Thaddeus Lowe,
Yeah, that's
who they started the Balloon Corps, which was our first Air Force, and the tether came loose and they floated over enemy lines, and nonetheless. But I went up in the Intrepid personally, and we went up about, I don't know, 500 or 600 feet. But the basket that the two of us were standing in came up to between my knee and my hip, and I don't know if you've ever been up in a balloon, a regular hot air balloon. I could lean on those baskets. But it was a little unnerving to be standing so far above the rim of that basket. You really had to hold on to the ropes. But the telegraph though was used by in the very first battle, Bull Run. A young man named Andrew Carnegie, who was a private, felt that it was very important to string the telegraphic lines to the front lines. And so they were starting to, for the very first time in history, get reports, in America anyway, from the front. And, back in the previous war with Mexico, we took Mexico City, and the decision was made by the generals on the ground, and the president didn't even know it had happened because it had to be communicated by horseback. But now that the Civil War had happened, the same general who had captured Mexico City on his own was taking a nap during first Bull Run or first Manassas, and so he really was almost completely out of it because he was old school. He didn't expect anything of any import to happen for days, and by the evening of the first day, because of telegraphic reports, Lincoln knew that it was a loss, and he stayed up all night listening to constant reports while General Scott, who was General-in-Chief, was sleeping. So things were changing, and Lincoln was on top of it.
Yes, sir.
So for President Davis, do you think if you got foreign support you would have won? And also, is it true that the Confederacy tried to get recognized by the Vatican?
Didn't work. France and Great Britain, especially Victoria, would not want to side with us over one issue, slavery. And I really believe that the Lincoln administration did everything they could so that wouldn't happen. But he didn't have to do much because they just said no. So 1833, that Great Britain did away with slavery. I believe so, which would have been almost 30 years. 33 years. 1833, I mean.
I was thinking 37, but it's close enough.
Okay. Well, that was the year that, wasn't it 1837 when Queen Victoria became queen?
Yeah.
Yes. So we can argue about dates and then we'll do our research and know more next time.
You're going to get the other side. Abraham Lincoln believed that secession was illegal. That was because the agreement to abide by the Constitution, as arranged in the early part of our country, was to settle disputes between states. The states were nearly at war with one another over issues, and because there was no higher authority. And so the Supreme Court and the Constitution were agreed upon by the states and every state thereafter as the higher authority. And all of our laws had to conform to that. And so to walk away from such an arrangement by yourself without any kind of mutual agreement would be considered illegal or disobedience. And Lincoln used the analogy of a marriage. He said a apparently the South believes in free love. We said that here in Indiana. Because we have a legally binding agreement called the Constitution, and it cannot be undone, just like a marriage cannot be undone, without a mutual agreement and a new arrangement, such as a divorce in a marriage. So that was why he believed that what they were doing was breaking the law. And in fact, the Confederate Constitution was written fairly soon after the war began, outlawed secession, because they understood that if you have a law, but the understanding is you don't have to obey that law, it's a little bit like putting a stop sign up and saying stop if you feel like it. It takes all the force of law away. And so that was the basis on which Lincoln took his position and took his stand. I'm not so sure that the South would have won in court after the war had that happen. And the other thing that I will say is the beginning of the cause of the war from the Southern, and from everybody's perspective at that time, I personally do not believe it was the Morrill Tax Act. Secession happened much earlier than that act was passed. And the vice president of the Confederacy himself said in his cornerstone speech, and you can read it online, that everybody knew that it was because of slavery, and that what they intended to do was build a new republic on the principle that Thomas Jefferson was wrong when he said all men are created equal. And then in Lincoln's second inaugural, he said everybody understood that slavery was somehow the cause of this war. So I personally do not believe that anyone at the time would have agreed that the Morrill Tax Act, which was basically nothing compared to what happened 30 years earlier, was the cause of rebellion. So that's my take on this.
Should be used in today's government. So we're going to head back. That's the end. And some of us got to have a long drive home with their carriage. Thank you.